Yo, what's going on, everyone? My name is Yogi, as always. I'm your host for Kid I Kick It FC, your number one podcast for all things Black soccer history. And joining me is a man that lives in a unique soccer city here in North America, very unique to others, that has three professional teams, but two of them play in a different league. He covers the vast majority of Canadian soccer. He's probably one of the leading voices in it. He's Mr. Alex Gangue Ruzic. I hope I got that right. I've been practicing.
I'll say on the right track. We'll say you're on the right track.
I'm on the right track. I'm not there, but I'm on the right track. Much like most of the national teams in America. But man, how are things for you, man? How are things going on for you?
I'm good. I mean, it's quieted down. It was a very busy summer, busy year. We're now kind of off-season mode, getting into that. So it's nice to take a little breather and then kind of dive right back into it. But it was a good year. I had a lot of fun.
I feel you. So pretty much like me, I'm sure. How is that first week for you when leagues are done? You know, the championship is played and everything. Like, do you just take a week and decompress, like delete every app from your phone, or is it like, nah, I gotta finish these articles and whatnot?
Nah, honestly, it's just at this point, it's just you're kind of always in something. Like it's like, all right, this ended. And there's some European stuff going on, Canadians playing, you know, even just because CPL would end, I kept an eye on MLS. MLS is now done. It kind of feels like the calendar never really stopped. So it's definitely slowed down. I've noticed like some of my evenings or the weekends. The weekends is the nice. You don't have like 7 o'clock kickoffs and stuff, but everything else has stayed the same.
Question: are you married?
No. But
okay, I was gonna say like, I can always tell my wife's mood changes when soccer season ends because now on the weekends I get like this big to-do list. Like during the season, I don't get a big to-do list because like, oh, you got to cover the game, you got to watch this game, you got to do this. Soon as the season ends, it's like, oh, here's your to-do list. I need you to do da-da-da-da-da-da. And whatnot.
That's it. No, I definitely. Well, that's it. Saturday nights, Sunday nights for the girlfriend. It's a little more free at least though. So that's the big change. Because when it's in the summer, I'm like maybe Thursday night, Friday night. Let's do something. Saturday sometimes a bit busy. Then in the winter, all right, we can open up Saturday again.
Yeah, right. I feel you on that, man. But so we brought you on because I mean I followed you on Blue Sky. You are one of the prominent voices in Canadian soccer. You cover the men's and women's national team. You cover the Canadian Premier League, even Vancouver Whitecaps. And don't get me mistaken, do you also cover Montreal and Toronto?
When I can. Keep an eye on them at least.
Keep an eye on them. That's fair enough. But I want to start off with the Canadian Premier League, a league that's probably, I would say around his, fifth year? About to go into his sixth?
I would say just finished the sixth.
So just finished the sixth.
Already.
Okay, wow.
Crazy because it started 2019.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Man.
Time flies.
Right. So this is a league that it's always been something that was talked about before about there was only the big three, you know, Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. And there wasn't really, I guess, other teams and other provinces within Canada. So with the Canadian Premier League growing rapidly since its inception, like, how would you assess the progress over the few years? And what do you think been the key parts of his growth?
Yeah, I think the big thing's been on the field. I think you can notice tangibly on the field there's been a big growth. I think that's the big discussion we've been having a lot this year. Like, oh, wow, you can see competitively this year, just within the league, the level of games tactically, skill-wise. And then it helped that, you know, they go in a Canadian championship and they did well, right? Like all three MLS teams lost to a CPL team at some point this year. So that kind of showed like, okay, wow, they're going out and getting some results. They went in CONCACAF and weren't embarrassing themselves. They were holding their own. I think the skill's been the big one. And that's the biggest area of growth. Because I mean, as we know from all the leagues, it takes time to get fans. It takes time. Sometimes it's generational, right? We're starting to see that in MLS where the league's been around 30 years. Kids of people who grew up going to games are starting to go to games. For the CPL, it's early for that. So I think it's just steady growth. And the biggest one has been on the field. And I think that's been the one they needed the biggest growth from.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, like what's still missing from the league in terms of growth? Because I mean, obviously, like you said, like there has been successes on the field when it comes to Canadian Championship. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Forge made it to CONCACAF Champions League.
Yeah, so twice now. Oh, three times if you include next year.
And whatnot. You guys have had various players making it. I think one player from the Canadian Premier League made it to the national team.
So there's a few. I mean, Joel Waterman made it to the World Cup from the CPL, which was cool. You got a couple other guys made their debuts, which were also cool to see.
So even though there's successes going on, what are some things that are still missing from it to reach its full potential in terms of like engagement, player development, and international recognition?
Yeah, there's still lots of growth to come. I don't think anyone will ignore that. I think the big thing too is just the timing. Like the pandemic was a big one that just halted a lot of the business side. So I think at this point, no one was expecting 8 teams. I think people would have maybe expected 10, 12, 14. I think getting a team in Quebec is a big, it's a big need. Like there's just so much talent in there. There's so much interest in the sport, and not having a team there has been, a bit of a miss in terms of, not having that opportunity come up. And I think, off the field as well, a lot of that stuff tied into what happened from COVID. Like a lot of teams almost had to start fresh because you have the momentum 2019 and boom, 2020 and parts of 2021. You have to already like rebuild the interest. Like, what is this thing again? So I'd say a lot of it's been off the field of just that growth, making sure the league gets to the potential it can be of being like a 16, 20 team league, finding the right markets too, right? Like getting what markets are working. It's been a bit tough because like some of the most successful markets have been like a Halifax, a small town, because there's not much pro sport. So they love it. It's been great. They sell out games. But then Toronto, Vancouver, the bigger cities, they've maybe struggled a bit more with attendance because there's a lot going on. How do you fix that? Because ideally, you'd like the league to have a footprint in the big cities, but also you'd like you'd like that there to be a bit more of a mark. And that's been also some challenges to try and get through.
Speaking about those challenges, I was on YouTube recently on One Soccer. Matter of fact, I think they did like a documentary about like the league and how it started and everything like that. And one of the teams that I'm very familiar with because I'm a fan of the Richmond Kickers and we used to play on FC Edmonton. What were the challenges around that club and why wasn't it as successful as others?
Yeah, well, Edmonton, a big one with stadium, just location, just the way it was set up. Fans were really, they weren't going to the stadium in big enough numbers, and there's just a lot of challenges with that market. It's one that's tough because there's a lot of potential there. You see it in glimpses, but just having that steady presence in Edmonton was a big factor, and it's unfortunate because it's like you mentioned, an iconic place. Since the 2010s, they had some big USL games, and the Can Champ, they had some great games. And it just never really worked for them. CPL too, like they never didn't have great success on the field too, which never helps in Canadian sports. It helps to have successful. It helps to have winners to kind of build a culture, to build an identity. So it was definitely a mix of on and off the field for Edmonton.
Yeah. So I answer this question because, like, an American's perspective, like here we view it as MLS, USL, like, and of course being a USL supporter, like. We're kind of looking at it as a second, third division, right? We have to fight the constant battle of we're not minor league, like we're professional, all this stuff. How is it viewed up there in Canada? Because you guys are kind of I would say, a unique dynamic to anywhere in the world, really, maybe outside of New Zealand, where, your 3 biggest teams in your 3 biggest markets play in an American-based league, but you guys have a domestic league here that is the top division. How is it viewed? What is the temperature around, like, how people there viewing it and taking to it?
Yeah, no, it's a similar battle, and it's funny because you mentioned it's like the CPL is a sanctioned D1 league, so it's like it is technically the top flight for men's football in the country, right? So it's like it's there, but then because MLS, maybe has a bit more of the prestige, the bigger names, bigger budgets, right, more history. It is that battle where, I think most people would say, they would view it as one versus underneath the other. And I think that's in terms of history that, it's valid. I think the CPL is a long way to go in terms of reaching that. And that's just the natural process of starting a league. But there is that battle. And I think the one thing that people have been pushing back against is that there's the same thing in the minor league, like you mentioned, which is like, that one doesn't really make as much sense because, okay, maybe in the US with how things are with sanctioning and hierarchy, you kind of see it. I agree as well. The USL is a good league. I enjoy watching, the level, and you see the players. But in Canada's case, like, this is the D1 league. Like, CPL has teams going straight to Champions Cup. It's got a certain level. Yes, it's new. Yes, it's not at that level of MLS, but there is that is a battle that's faced where, especially for those maybe unfamiliar with soccer, it kind of gets positioned as a minor league, which I don't think is fair in terms of, the growth, because ultimately it's something where I think ideally you want it to grow into its own top flight D1 league as it is.
Yeah, and I want to ask you this question. So, like, when the league came around, how did the league like market itself? Like, did it go about as like, hey, we're the opposite of the MLS teams, or was it kind of just like how did they go about marketing themselves? Were they trying to go get people and make them soccer fans, or were they already just like, hey, like this is another league or another team for you to support?
I'd say it depends really on the city, because I think like some cities it's like, okay, this is like a sports team, this is like a unique opportunity, you got to get it. Like Halifax is a great example, because like in Halifax they're now like one of the driving forces in terms of sports there, because there all they had was junior hockey. So now they got a pro sports team to follow. They sell 6,000 every week. They're about to expand capacity this year to like 8,000. I'm sure they'll sell that out. They want to build a 15,000 seat stadium. Like everything's going great there because they've kind of positioned themselves in that way. In other cities, it's just kind of like, yeah, this is soccer. If you like soccer, come check it out. One thing that the league has done, and they've been pretty consistent with, is they've not sold anything that's not true, in the sense they haven't been like, oh, we're going to go after the stars. They've been like, look, this is a league that developing talent is going to be a big goal. So yeah, you might come, you might only see some guys for 2-3 years, but you're going to see them go on to bigger and better things. And fans have embraced that. And it makes sense, because it's like, if that's going to be the case, there's room for that all around the world. Ajax, huge clubs do that, Benfica. And I think that some teams have done a really good job of like Cavalry Forge, where they win, but they move talent. Like Cavalry, my goodness, they've got Waterman, like I mentioned earlier. Laturi, he went to Europe and played for the national team. Zator, he's played for the national team. They've had all these guys come through and make that step to the next level. And I think that's been a really good selling point, because fans they like to see that talent go on to that next level. And they know it's happening. I think that's been a good selling point.
This is talking about that. So it seems like the CPL has kind of positioned itself in a way of like, hey, we'll take, and I just kind of feeds into my next question as well. It was like the CPL positioned themselves in a way of which they fill in that gap where, yeah, this player might not be good enough to make it to Vancouver or Toronto or Montreal or whatnot. They can come in, get it at this level, stay here for 2-3 years, and then we can move the ball to that next step, regardless of where that is. How has the CPL kind of balanced fostering Canadian players with bringing in international talent? Because you have a team there that has a famous bigger brother in Atletico Madrid and Atletico Ottawa. How has that been for cultivating young Canadian talent?
Yeah, I mean, Canadian talent's remained a priority, which is really important, really nice to see. I mean, there's rules in the league that makes it that you have to have Canadian talent. You got the U21 minutes where teams have to have a minimum of 3 Canadian U21s on their roster. They have to get at least 2,000 minutes a year. So like you need to get guys on the field if you want to be able to, because if you don't, you're going to get fined and you're not even going to be eligible for the playoffs if you don't hit the requirement. So
has any team got fined yet? I just want to know.
No, but it's close. Some teams have come close, but everyone's always got the 2,000, and some teams got like 4,000 or 5,000. For them it was light work. They hit it like game 10 of the season. Some teams, last game of the season, they're throwing out their U21s to get over the line just barely. But it's good because it forces guys to play. You're only allowed 7 internationals too, so at least you're keeping Canadian spots. But it's been a balance, because what is the best way to go, right? And I don't think there's an easy answer, because if you get a bunch of veterans, it's good. They can come in and raise the level. But if they're taking spots for your young guys, is that the way to go? But then if you get young internationals, they can come in, they can really help the league. But if you have too many of them, they're also taking minutes away from the young guys. So that's been a bit of a battle I've noticed in terms of figuring out. I know earlier in the process, they kind of went, okay, let's go for the older internationals. And then for a point, they're like, oh, let's go younger. And I think now they've found a good balance where I think is you need 3 internationals under a certain age, and then the rest can be above. And I think that's a good mix, because you do want some internationals who can come and push the league while also having guys who can mentor and also just bring cultural some things, right? It's good to have some older Brazilians, older Europeans, older African players, older Asian players who've kind of got that different experience to help grow the league.
So with that, like, how is and talking about growing the league and everything like that, like, how is the CPL's relationship when it comes to being in those MLS markets? I know I'm talking about a lot about MLS, but it's so intriguing to see because very rarely do you see a nation has like three, like I said before, like three teams established in one league, but in a different country, and then be like, hey, we're gonna make our own first division. So how is that relationship with MLS? Like, do you see a lot of cross player movement? Do these teams, like, do those MLS teams work well with the CPL teams or vice versa?
They definitely work with each other. I think that if anything, it can be more. I think they're still pushing the lines of that, so to speak. Like Vancouver and Montreal have done a good job, and Toronto. They've all done lots of loans we've seen, which has been good. Like some key CPL players like Montreal, Jonathan Sirois, their starting goalie. He spent 2 years on loan in Valor in Winnipeg, getting his reps. He won a Golden Glove, and then went to MLS and made that jump, which was good. There's a few other examples. But I think the big thing too is there still can be more movement. Like one area of struggle is like the 3 Canadian MLS teams haven't gotten a lot of talent. Like Joel Waterman was 2020, they bought him from Montreal. And since then, there hasn't been a whole lot of guys moving from the CPL to the 3 Canadian MLS teams. Like there was Mo Farsi in Columbus, and there's some other guys in the US, but in Canada, funnily enough, it's been struggling. So yeah, I think there could definitely be more in terms of growing that relationship. Because I think if you're the MLS teams, you could be using these loans to your advantage. Get these guys, go get them pro minutes. Like they're going out and playing in a league against adults. And then on the flip side, there could be some young talents I think they could be looking at that could really come in and give them depth, cheap domestic depth that is proven at the professional level. That doesn't maybe have the same question marks if they otherwise might have.
Yeah. Okay. And that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, in terms of like how that relationship works, I think one of the most fascinating things, I mean, you live in Vancouver. How is the whole balance of having Pacific, Vancouver, and Vancouver Whitecaps all in the same city, right? Or is it like Pacific in one different province?
Pacific's just on the island, so they're just the got to take a ferry a couple hours away, but relatively all close. So it's like definitely Vancouver. Both Vancouver teams are similar markets, and Pacific, the island, it's its own city. Victoria got the capital out there, but even then, it's a challenge because a lot of people on the island they support like the Vancouver Canucks, the hockey team. They'll support the BC Lions, the football team. Like there is a bit of crossover between the two cities when it comes to that sort of stuff.
Okay, so my big question is like when Vancouver came up with the CPL team there, was there a max exodus of like Vancouver fans going over to the CPL team, or was it like, oh hey, I'll support both?
There's been a mix because I think for the Whitecaps, in terms of the timing, there were a few fans that had started to give up on the Whitecaps for different reasons. You know, in the 2010s, there was a few scandals that plagued the club, right? That some fans walked away from. So for them, Vancouver FC is like, boom, this is perfect. This is another club I can put my support behind. For a lot of others, I've seen a lot of them, it's both. I think that's been interesting. And I think it was in Vancouver FC in first year, actually, they had a huge issue with scheduling. They clashed a lot of games with the Whitecaps. But last year, I noticed they made a big difference where the games rarely clashed, which was good. It kind of opened the door for fans to be like, all right, I can go to a Vancouver FC on a Saturday and I guess since it's MLS, it would be the Whitecaps on the Saturday and then Vancouver FC on the Sunday, which was good because it is a bit of a challenge because in theory, there's competition, right? They're battling, but at the same time, they aren't. And I thought that was interesting to see that they're kind of, picking and choosing and trying to work, to not step on each other's toes, so to speak.
Is the same thing true for the Toronto franchise? And you gotta help me out here. What CPL teams are in Toronto's area? Because I totally blanked on. I wanted to say Calvary, but I don't think that's right.
So you got York United. They're definitely more in Toronto, and then you got Forge, which is Hamilton, which is just outside Toronto. But they're an adjacent. But there's been a bit more interesting because Hamilton, it's its own city. It's big. Some pretty big athletes come from there. Like I think Shea Gilgeous Alexander comes from Hamilton. Like they got some talent coming through there. They support Forge fantastically. Like they had some great attendance last year. I mean, Forge wins a lot, it helps. But then York, it's been a bit of a challenge because they're more in Toronto, and I know there has been some tough challenges logistically in terms of both teams, and because TFC kind of is you know, they're on their own in that regard, and that's been a big challenge for York to try to face up against that.
Yeah, I remember York when they started off as York 9 and then changed it to York FC.
Yeah, that's what they rebranded after a few years.
I remember that. All right, well, talk about CPL, and I think like one of the cool things about it is just that CPL, but like Canada by itself is just the rise of the national team, given maybe over the last 5 years or so, with the emerging talents of Jonathan David and Alfonso Davies have been, you know, remarkable. How have their success, and I'm assuming there's other players as well, like, but how has their success impacted, you know, Canadian soccer both home and abroad, and then maybe like in TV media as well?
Yeah, no, it's been huge. It's been huge to see just the growth of this team, to see where it's come now, from where it was before in terms of just struggling. The men's national team never really captured the attention, and yeah, those two have really been a worldwide phenomenon, right? Where it's like people know who Alfonso Davies is, and it's outside of soccer circles. Like he's one of the most recognizable athletes in the country, right? He's right up there with any of the best hockey players, best basketball players, et cetera, that have come out from here. Same with Jonathan David. He's really put himself into that mix. And it's funny because soccer is huge in Canada. It's always been huge, but it's always been the big issue has been domestic. Like people here love the European game. It's big. Like people know their EPLs. They know their Barcelona's, Real Madrid's. But now that there's Canadians playing at that level, they're putting the 2-2. Like, oh, okay, this Canadian team's all right. Because before it was kind of unfathomable to have a Davies playing at Bayern, to have David playing in France, and now maybe one day, you know, as a free agent, maybe he's at a Barcelona, maybe he's at a Premier League team. So it's been huge in terms of like connecting the interest of people here like soccer, but connecting, like Canadian soccer can be of a level too that people are used to seeing elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think that's so unique and weird because you kind of you see it a lot here too, where a lot of people are realizing, oh, Americans can play at this level. Like they can play at the European level and whatnot. And they're just like realizing what's going on. So another thing I want to ask you about is outside of those, obviously we can talk endlessly about Jonathan David and Alfonso Davies. But I think one of the things that really brought a lot of people's attention to Canada soccer as a whole was the men's national team. Also the women's national team. I don't want to dismiss them because they've been amazing, winning gold at the world at the Olympics. But for the men's side of it, how big was it qualifying for the 2022 World Cup and seeing that team come together with John Herman and everything like that?
Oh, it was incredible. It was one of the best moments of this country's seen in terms of this sport. It just like what was great about it was just the momentum. And that's, I think, the best part about a World Cup qualifiers. And it's a shame Canada doesn't get to go be a part of it this time because they're co-hosting, right? You get to skip it all. It's just the way it can build. Like I still remember the first day, 2021, they were playing Bermuda in an empty stadium in Orlando because of COVID restrictions. And no one knew about the game. But what I love is that months later, years later, it just builds. Next thing you know, you win. You're into the next round. You're playing Haiti. Then you win. You're playing Honduras. You're playing US. You're playing the big dogs. I love the way it built, and people started to pay attention of, oh, this Canadian team's actually got a chance. Oh, they're winning games. They're top of the thing. I just love the way that just built buzz. It built buzz, and all of a sudden people started talking. You'd go outside, and people were talking about the Canadian men's national team the same way they'd be talking about their local hockey team or whatever's going on. Like it was the news going. And I think that was huge because, again, like I mentioned earlier, people love the sport in this country. So it was all of a sudden like people who had been for their whole lives supporting Italy, supporting France, supporting, countries maybe where their grandparents were from in South America, et cetera. They're like, oh, okay, like Canada's got a chance to go to this World Cup. And it did so much to have. So that run in terms of the momentum, it built the crowds too. The crowds were selling out for games, which was, not something we'd seen a lot of for games where even they'd play at home, it'd be 5K because no one would really care about the men's national team. All of a sudden they had this good team. And what helped too is they're likable guys too, right? Like you look at the team, like people saw them like, yeah, we see ourselves in that team in terms of personalities, people that clearly liked each other, and it just felt like it was a perfect storm the way it all came together.
It was a perfect storm because I mean that team took over CONCACAF by storm. Like I think it went a shock win, not a shock win, a much deserved win against the USMNT and everything like that. Speaking about it from a diversity standpoint, I think one of the things that really stood out to us here me in America was just the amount of Black Canadians that were on the team and how important they were to the team. Because it was you kind of saw it from both sides. You saw the USMT become very Black as well, and how many of those stars were leading the team, and then you saw the same thing Canadian side. For you, like someone who covers the national team at a very deep level, was there a lot of pride in seeing the amount of people of color, represent the Canadian national team? And what was the national reception to it?
Oh, I think it was great. I think you can't talk about how important that is, because that's the culture, right? That's the beauty of Canada. People will say time and time again is how diverse it is. You go anywhere, it's a melting pot. But sometimes, sports, especially hockey, in terms of being the national sport unofficially, but it is the national sport, right?
Mm-hmm.
For as much people love hockey, diversity has been a big issue, and there's plenty of reasons for that. Cost, just culture have been that a big reason for that. So for them, soccer has also been a huge sport here and it's one that kind of represents everyone. To see that manifested in that way was huge. Like you looked on the field and you saw a team that was like, yeah, that represents Canada. Like you have a lot of Black people of color. Even during that qualifying run, we had some people of Asian descent made the field, which is huge because there's a big Asian population. And now there's a few guys like Mathieu Chouanier, who's he's got Filipino background on the national team, which I think is so sick that's happening. It just really represents what Canada can be, and the fact that you had just 23 guys coming together. They had their diverse backgrounds, and that they go on the field. They're all, sons of immigrants. Some of them weren't even born in Canada. Some of them were. But ultimately, when they put on the shirt, they were Canadian. And I think people could also really see themselves in that. And so I think that was a huge aspect of that run. And I think that's been a huge aspect of this team, that you look at them and it represents what this beautiful country is supposed to be about, but it sometimes isn't always.
Yeah, no, I totally understand it. And I mean, I think it's fair to have this conversation as well, to be honest about it. But like, how much of it was educated people that like, Alfonso Davies is Canadian, even though he is of, African descent and things, and he is Canadian. Like, how much of those conversations were happening when this national team was starting to get that recognition?
Yeah, I mean, those are conversations you still have to have, right? It's ultimately, being Canadian is it's very different to many people. It's, for some, you're born there, you have a different affinity to someone who came there, right? But I think for some is realizing ultimately he holds a passport, he's eligible first and foremost. Like it's not like he had some fake passport, or he was only like, ultimately he was eligible, right? There's rules, like even if you come in, like you have to live here for 5 years or have some sort of connection. And I think ultimately from there is realizing like, okay, like he's just as Canadian as you and I or whoever's next door. And that's the beauty of this country. And I think some people, it kind of got lost in the sense that even like, if you're talking about white Europeans, right? Like ultimately they're immigrants too. And I thought that this brings me back to a really cool thing that happened this summer is unfortunately on X there was during Copa America, there was some guy who put out a pretty racist tweet being like, oh, look at what this team has become. And it was, showing how 20 years ago it was all white guys. And then now is, there's a bunch of Black guys. But then Alistair Johnson, one of the white guys on this Canadian team, quote tweeted, and he's like, no, like, look, I'm a white guy. My grandparents were European immigrants too. We're all immigrants. This team is third, first, second generation. Like at the end of the day, what we all have in common is that we came to this country. We try to represent the values. We got a passport. Ultimately, that makes us all Canadian. So I think that was a really big moment in terms of like, that was a good way for him to put that out and be like, look, this is what we represent as a team.
That's so dumb, man. Especially know that you have other players like Alex Johnson. When he did that, he became one of my favorite players. I was like,
so sick of him. I love when he did that. I was like, okay, that's a leader out there.
Yeah, honestly, man, because that's like, I'm pretty sure you've been in situations like I have, where you're in that situation and then someone who you don't expect does that for you, and it gives you that extra boost of like, oh, I do have support, I do have allies out there and with this and everything, which is real cool to see. Speaking about the women's side of it, because we can't neglect them. Speaking about the women's side and everything like that, like how is the women's national team growing and building, given coming off of the Olympics?
I would say it's been it's been a wild couple of years for sure for the women's national team, just from everything from winning the gold, just what it represented. Because for that team, I mean, they always had the potential to do that. Everyone knew they were capable of winning a World Cup, capable of winning a gold, and they'd come close, but just never got it over the line. I think that was just so big for them psychologically to have that. Because look, a lot of people in this country who have fallen in love with Canadian soccer. For most people, myself included, the women's national team was the first team that really showed what possible for Canada to do. Like some of my first memories of Canadian soccer was watching the women's team in like the 2011 World Cup or 2012 Olympics when they got the bronze, and they should have beat the US, but other forces were against them. That so to have that 2021 gold medal was huge in terms of recognizing, because what's been tough for the women's program is just fighting for what they deserve. Like I just find it so wild that this country's literally hosted a World Cup in 2015. It's been so successful, and we're only getting a new professional women's league next year. Like that is exciting, but it's like also frustrating because this league should have been in place for 10 years now, right? Like, because it's like the 2026 World Cup. The CPL exists because of the 2026 World Cup, and it's great. I think that's good that they're like, all right, look, if you want to have the World Cup, you need a men's league. But where was that energy in 2015, right? When the World Cup was here, you should have a women's league. So it's one of those where I think that gold medal was key in terms of stuff like this league, stuff like, it really fire starting that, like, okay, you can really, as a Canadian, young girl, say growing up, that like going and playing professional soccer is something you can do as a career. There's talent in this country. So no, that was definitely a big moment for many things in terms of what's next now for their future.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you about that, about like the Canadian, is there plans to make a Canadian women's league? I think it'll be partnered with the CPL, or they're going to be their own separate thing.
I mean, for now they're separate. Hopefully there's some talks because they got some of the same market, same stadiums. So it'd be good to have collaboration, because I think ultimately it'd be good for everyone. We need these leagues. We need these leagues for the men. We need these leagues for the women. We need it for the young players coming through so that they can at 14, 15, 16 play pro, get those minutes, maybe move on elsewhere. So I think this is it's so needed, and hopefully there can be, because that's the one thing with Canadian soccer that is, let me tell you that, like in terms of one thing that's held this country back is that someone said it really well. They said instead of putting bricks on top of each other and building, they throw them at each other. Like sometimes people aren't working together. It's different forces. You see that sometimes with the association in past years with clubs. But I think hopefully what we've seen over the last few years, people are starting to work together more. People are realizing like, this is something that's going to happen together. And I think that hopefully the two new leagues, because, CPL is still a new league. This NSL is going to be a new league. Hopefully we can all work together because we need that for so many reasons.
Yeah, I'm going to have to take that saying as well, because that same thing applies to here in America, where USL, DSL, MLS all kind of work against each other for whatever reason. But as we slowly start to wrap things up, I want to ask you this, like, as you look ahead the next 5 or so years, 2026 World Cup is coming up, and then we have another Women's World Cup coming up in 2028. Like, what are the most important things the CPL, Canadian soccer as a whole, need to focus on to maintain momentum and continue to grow both domestic and internationally?
Yeah, I think for CPL is really take advantage of 2026. Because I think people are going to go crazy for that tournament. I mean, no, it's the World Cup. You saw it in 2015 with the women's. Like that tournament set records for attendance at the time. They sold out a final and Canada wasn't playing, right? It was the US-Japan final. Like people will fall in love with this tournament. We see it. Canada loves their events. We've seen it with the Olympics. We've seen it. But the big thing is going to be what's next. Okay, people are going to fall in love with soccer. You've got to realize that after there's this in your backyard, right? There's going to be the CPL is going to be there. The NSL is going to be there too, because you can't forget the women's league and what that will provide. Use that momentum. And I think that's going to be the big catalyst, because I think this men's national team, they're going to be good for at least 10 years. They're set up to be good for at least 10 years. There's more talent than ever. So it's not, what's good is that this isn't like they would have made this World Cup regardless, I think. And that's why 22 was so key, that they proved they could make it without getting a free co-host. Because that would have been a bit rough, right? If this was the first time in 40 years you make it, it's not, you don't even qualify properly. Yeah. And I think they're going to qualify in 2030, especially now with this 48 team. So that momentum isn't going to be a problem. What's the challenge is, how do you get people interested in soccer from year round? Because ultimately, it's not just the World Cups, right? There's leagues, there's, as we know, the calendar never stops. And I think the big challenge for them is going to be, there's going to be all this momentum, because this men's teams is a golden generation. They're going to be good. This women's team's not going to go anywhere. But how do you turn the momentum that comes from these big tournaments, these big moments, and turn it into people loving the game every week, going to the game, bringing their kids, bringing their friends? So hopefully they do everything in their power to position themselves to get those people that like the sport, but maybe have only have a casual relationship with it, and get that week to week sort of investment that the leagues deserve.
Word. Well, man, I just want to say, like, anytime I watch CPL, because I do keep an eye on it from time to time. I make sure to DM you and hit you up to ask you any questions that kind of regard anything that's going on or anything like that, man.
Oh, so anytime. I'm always happy to chat CPL, anything Canadian soccer. And hey, this is such a good time to come on and chat.
Well, look, that's what's up, man. Where can everyone reach out to you, support your work, and things like that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, mainly I'm just on social, like Blue Sky, Alex Gangue Ruzic. I mean, I still got my Twitter account. I don't use it much, but at Alex Gangue Ruzic, you can find me there. Mostly just, writing, talking right now for One Soccer. So that's a big thing. But yeah, if you follow me on the socials, that's where I'll be. We even just talking about the sport. I love it so much. I love watching. I'll be keeping an eye, and always happy to meet lots of great people from around the world, and just chat about this beautiful game we all love.
Word. Well, as always, listeners, we just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your day for listening to our show on Canadian Premier League. I learned something. I hope you did as well. And for anything more on Black soccer history, you can make sure to follow us on Blue Sky, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app at Can I Kick It FC. So with that being said, be easy, everyone. We'll talk to you later.